Welcome to another episode of the MEGIN Spotlight Series. Today, we are delighted to welcome Elaine O'Loughlin. We were introduced to Elaine at the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance Family Conference event recently in Boston. After meeting Elaine there, she kindly agreed to share her caregiver's perspective on her daughter's epilepsy diagnosis and surgery with us. Hello, Elaine. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
So I think let's just begin with our first question. Can you provide an introduction to your daughter's epilepsy? How old was she when diagnosed, and what type of epilepsy did she have?
Sure. So Fia was diagnosed at 5.5 months with infantile spasms. She didn't actually present typically. She had the very isolated events. While we had the diagnosis, during the course of the treatment, while the spasms resolved with the steroid treatment, unfortunately, focal seizures emerged during that time, which is quite common in kids with spasms, and they became very drug resistant. So she has focal epilepsy.
From our conversation, once your daughter was diagnosed with drug-resistant epilepsy, your daughter began the process of a pre-surgical evaluation. At this stage, can you tell our audience about what modalities were used and the findings?
Sure. So on diagnosis, she was given an EEG and an MRI. And initially at her first MRI, it came back as normal. However, on further evaluation, not even 24 hours, they got a leading neuroradiologist, and it was suspicious. So we did the classical MRIs within the first couple of months of diagnosis. However, because her seizures were on the left-hand side and they were focal seizures, which meant she would be a surgical candidate. So that's when they started to kind of ramp up the pre-surgical evaluation. And she was quite young, and because her lesion wasn't clear on the MRI, it was sort of a kind of waiting game until her brain kind of became bigger so we could get clearer images on different imaging modalities.
So when your daughter was 1, she had a research MEG scan at Boston Children's Hospital. Can you tell our audience a bit more about how this came about? Were you participating in any research studies? Can you also please elaborate on how the research MEG became part of clinical discussions and data used at the surgical conference?
Mhm. So, because Fia's imaging was initially suspicious, but there wasn't a clear malformation or a clear lesion on her imaging, they wanted to do further investigations to really build up her surgical case. Because, at Boston Children's Hospital, they're quite conservative in relation to stopping the seizures, but also not causing additional disabilities, which we appreciated obviously as parents. But at Children's, they had a thing called the Baby Meg, which is research, but then also it could be incorporated into her surgical case. So that's what we did. We did a Baby Meg initially as a research study, but actually the data taken from that was fundamental in her surgical evaluations.
That's really interesting to hear. So your daughter first had a laser ablation surgery. Can you tell us more about this and the outcome for your daughter?
Sure. So in addition to doing the Baby Meg initially, they were trying to find the source of Fia's seizures. So from in January 2023, we opted to get more data, so we could really be sure of where the zone was. Initially, Fia, because her seizures were on the left side, all her EEGs were saying temporal lobe, and she was going to go for a temporal lobectomy. we actually wanted to get more data, which led us to a stereo EEG, and that's how the laser ablation came about. So the baby Meg really informed on where to place the electrodes in relation to important nodes that potentially could be starting the seizure network. And from that stereo EEG, they actually found that her seizures were not coming from the temporal lobe, but that they were coming from deeper structures in the cortex, such as like the insula cortex. And that's where the laser ablation, when they did the laser, sorry, in her insula cortex in March of 2023. Initially, even though it was a 6 to 8 hour surgery, and a one night stay in the ICU, it was very smooth. The recovery was super quick. She did great. And we thought we were, in a home run in that she had 6 days without a seizure, which was huge for her, considering we had little to no control since February 2021. And unfortunately, they started to pop back up. She had a mild cold after that 6 days in March, and they came back.
So, when your daughter's seizures returned following the surgery, can you walk us through the process of her second pre-surgical evaluation? So, you mentioned previously also seeking some additional clinical options. Did you also repeat all the imaging and pre-surgical evaluation workup at this point?
Yeah, so I may have like skipped over a little bit, but in addition to just a regular MRI, Boston Children's Hospital, her team, we did PET scans, SPECT scans, and then also for the second pre-surgical evaluation, they also did motor mapping and functional imaging to see where her language zones were. Sophia has an expressive speech delay, and they had hoped that, the language zone would have been on the healthy side, on the right-hand side, given that she has a large seizure network of damaged or diseased tissue on the left. However, she actually did have a formed language zone, which the team had to reevaluate the areas in which they wanted to potentially resect, disconnect going forward. So the additional imaging we did was more so to see like where her functional zones were. And all the way through this, interesting enough, that like her baby Meg from when she was a year and finding that source localization was brought all the way through. And a super like an unbelievable part of PISA with Monica Jones is they offer travel grants for parents who are seeking, second opinions, for example. And I tend to email a lot of people and try and annoy, and we're very, very fortunate to be uh like my emails were well received, and that, the likes of Sean Hussein on UCLA got on a Zoom call with us. He closely collaborates with our team at Children's Hospital and said, you should do this, this, and this. But we couldn't fly out, or we weren't going to move our care there. For a lot of different reasons. And then I also, through Kate Cooper, was okay, reach out to Scott Perry in Texas. And luckily enough, his colleague Christos was actually also at Boston Children's Hospital, a doctor as well. And he actually examined and evaluated Fia's baby Meg data, which was really informative to trying to find sources of where her seizures were coming from. So it really was like across the United States, all coming together. And I was probably being a bit forceful, but the more data, the better, and you can make informed decisions. And through actually the grant, I got from PISA through Monica Jones was myself and Fia actually traveled to Texas to see Scott Perry in October 23. And he actually was even on our surgical evaluation calls at Boston Children's as well. So yeah, we did a lot of, as a parent, you have to, I feel like you want to get all the answers. I didn't want to disprove anybody, but I wish someone had a miraculous or a miracle answer. But the fact that all the teams from the different hospitals said the same thing, it meant that myself and my husband, like we were doing the right thing. So, yeah.
It's amazing that you were able to get multiple opinions on this, and also the
Mhm.
travel grant from PESA is, an incredible thing
Yeah.
that they do as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. So how did the data from your daughter's MEG scan inform the decision-making process for the clinical and research team ahead of the second surgery?
Mhm. So in 2023, we had the initial baby Meg and also her additional imaging, PET, SPECT, MRIs, and all her dozens of EEGs that she's done informed on the stereo EEG. And because she was only 2 and she was very young to do a stereo EEG, they couldn't record or implant a lot of electrodes. However, unfortunately, when her seizures came back in March, we started the process of planning a second evaluation and a second workup, like a phase 2, which would be another stereo EEG. And in the meantime, as her seizures ramped up, we were just, trial and erroring more medications, trying to see if we could get her to that, over 3, so her brain would be more developed and her skull would be thicker, so she'd be able to map more electrodes essentially. And for the second evaluation, we didn't have a second Meg, but it was still informative for the placements of the electrodes and where to implant. So at that stage, she had something like 13 electrodes on the left-hand side, and it actually covered a broader area, including the frontal lobes, which wasn't incorporated as heavily in the initial stereo.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
So what was your daughter's experience of having a MEG scan compared to the other imaging modalities?
So Fia was just turned 1. And honestly, because we didn't have to sedate her, because she would have adverse reactions to some benzodiazepines. Every time she would wake up from anesthesia, she would have more seizures and clusters. Um, so for the baby Meg, it was very smooth. She sat on my husband's lap, and while the scientist or the tech put on the cap, and she watched, some cartoons and ate her puffs. And we kind of just sat around and chatted, and then she had a little nap and went into the Meg. So it was very, very smooth. We were told to expect, 4 to 5 hours because, you want to catch good data. But even if we were there, I think we were there for maybe 3 hours, but it was very, very smooth. No IVs, and it was very, very low stress.
So can you tell us more about your daughter's second brain surgery and the outcome for your daughter? How is she doing today?
Sure. I'm smiling today because she is, as I touch wood, she is 300 days without an event, which is huge. After having, everything going on since 2021. Um, in November 2023, she had the stereo EEG for the 4 to 5 days of recording, and it was around just the day before Thanksgiving. Myself and my husband, were given essentially 3 options from her team, in that we can do nothing and try to medically manage her. And after failing over 12 medications, that it wasn't really an option. Number two, we could do a VNS, which our team said would likely do little or no improvement, if you will. And the third option was to try to break up the seizure network on the left-hand side, which would mean a disconnection. So they wouldn't resect the full tissue, but they would just disconnect the tissue electrically. And the tissue would still be viable, but just not signaling to the rest of the tissue. And then, because she had such a broad network, ultimately we would try to medically manage. And then when she was 6, get to an RNS, another neurostimulation. Um, and Fia is functionally very strong. She looks great, but could have, anywhere from 10 to 25, 30 seizures all in around her sleep. And we could see it was really impacting um, her cognition, her daily life of being a toddler, a lot of speech and aggression issues. So myself and my husband, I say that I don't want to say it lightly, it's a very heavy decision, but we had to essentially do something. So we couldn't go home and have her continually seized to come back into the hospital a week later. So we went with a third option, and nothing was guaranteed. It was like a 50-50% chance. And what we wanted, and when you get to a stage of having a child with drug-resistant epilepsy, you want them to have a typical life and like improve their quality of life. So they're a happy kid, they're developing, versus we didn't even think we'd get to 0. We were like, just less is better. Less is way better, which means we can maybe take off one medication. She doesn't have to be on 4 seizure medications. So there was all that in the loop. And so she had something like, just over a 10-hour surgery on the 22nd of November in 2023. And yeah, it was a long recovery. She had we went with the disconnection. I think the worst part for her was like her face completely swelled up and she couldn't open her eyes for 5 days. And bless her, she, at 4 o'clock in the morning, she's like, Mama, ice cream, ice cream. I said, yes, you can have ice cream. So but luckily she's super strong, like physically, so the meant her recovery went quicker, and we were in the hospital for just under 3 weeks. And she came home with a gnarly scar and a shaved head, and she's doing really well, like really well. She's just like so alert. She's come alive. Her sleep is so much better. We just hope that it continues and just continue to see her blossom. So
I mean,
super, super grateful for our teams.
300 days of seizure freedom is an
Yeah.
incredible achievement. So thank you so much for sharing how she's doing now. We appreciate you speaking with us as an advocate for epilepsy awareness and supporting the advancements of treatments. So can you tell our audience if there are any advocacy groups you are involved with that you recommend?
Um, I might be biased on the surgical route, but the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgical Alliance is phenomenal. Not only just for their information on, hospitals or surgical teams, but also information, what do you do after surgery? How do you help your child return to school? The IEP process, incredibly helpful. So I've, had a sway towards Monica Jones's foundation just because it's super helpful, and after attending the conference really opened your eyes even though my daughter, or our daughter Fia, is only 4, like thinking long term for a transitioning into adulthood and what does that look like. So it's incredibly helpful.
And our last question is, what is your one piece of advice that you would give to parents who are facing similar challenges?
I think that while more voices on the table can kind of confound the information, I think always getting a second opinion, even a third opinion, because you want to be sure as a parent that you're doing the right thing. And I think even when you're thinking of getting a second opinion, you're you're already doing more. And I also think that while taking the step for the stereo EEGs, not just doing one, but two. And I will say the January versus November stereo EEGs, even though they were 8 months apart, they were completely different in relation to how Fia reacted, both medically and behaviorally. And having gone through that, having open discussions with your teens, even though it sounds very invasive, which it is, getting all that data ultimately, has led her to where she is now. And I think the more data and you get, the more informed choices and decisions you can make for your child's healthcare. So I'm a scientist at heart, but I think the data speaks volumes. So I would encourage parents to, ask questions, second opinions, reach out to other parents that have gone through similar things. It's very helpful.
So thank you, Elaine, for your time today. This has been extremely informative for our audience, and it's been an honor for us to share insights from your perspective. So thank you again for sharing your story with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.